There's like a real chair here. Welcome to the apartment.
I live here. How would you describe CEDU, and how would you break it down?
Okay. Well, early CEDU, in my opinion, has two chapters. There's before the raid and after the raid. In the late 60s, 67, 68, CEDU was primarily located in populated communities. Palm Springs, Riverside County. They had a townhouse, they had a ranch. I believe CEDU also ran a service station. And this weird little program with its sensitivity sessions and encounter groups, calling itself a family and a fountain of youth for youth, was infiltrating various Southern California towns. And that wasn't unusual. In the late 60s, California, there was a self-help cult on every corner.
Yeah, of course. I think we're still
Yeah, that's true. What what's unusual was that an extremely shrewd community was very concerned about and ultimately rejected the CEDU family. They saw it as a kind of villainous force. So eventually, a warrant is requested by a district attorney, and a search is conducted by sheriff's deputies. They photographed CEDU's ranch compound. They tape recorded everything. They had a portable crime lab, and on the surface, this was about code violations, but really, it was a raid. I mean, if you're going to do some like plumbing inspections, you're not going to bring a portable crime lab.
usually.
Yeah. I mean, in this article that I read, I mean, even Mel Wasserman mentioned that a uniformed deputy suggested that the portable lab is used in the investigation of major felony crimes. So the raid just should have ended CEDU entirely. It didn't. Instead, the family relocated to Running Springs, a backwoods lodge in a remote mountain town, and they flourished there. Not just flourished, they flaunted the idea that CEDU was a noble victim pushed out of its home by a jittery, vengeful town, and city councilman with a vendetta. And by the way, this isn't my own interpretation. In 1969, Mel Wasserman dashed off a swaggery, disdainful op-ed, and he says he's under attack by certain extremist groups in the San Bernardino area. He rages about a witch hunt and claims elected representatives are now involved in smear tactics.
Yeah, love the witch hunt metaphors.
Yeah. And 2 years later, he's still raging, this time in a CEDU pamphlet. And he's talking about how CEDU was required to relocate after local residents complained about the presence of the ranch. This is CEDU after the raid. Wasserman was hell-bent on perpetuating CEDU at all costs. And not necessarily because he believed in rehabilitating anyone. There's certainly a number of ex-residents and staffers who vehemently believe that Wasserman created an alternative education, that he was a self-help guru. This is a guy with a pedagogic creed. I've yet to find any of that. From everything I've learned, Wasserman appears to have been a smug, cigar-chomping businessman who wanted to get asses in beds. That's his phrase, and he used it often, asses in beds. And maybe more important, he wanted to get back at those who he believed screwed him. After the raid, more than anything, the story of CEDU is a revenge fantasy. So once the family moved into the mountains and became disconnected from real outside scrutiny, negative coverage dropped. This is the post-raid living in the mountains, changing the narrative, controlling the narrative, CEDU.
So, what made you want to start investigating CEDU in the first place?
I can actually answer that. About 5 years ago, I was reading a glowing tribute to Mel Wasserman. It was posted in 2002, I believe. And it was written by a former CEDU staffer called Dan Earl. Dear Leader Mel died a kind of empire builder, and Earl was addressing Mel's movement and educational philosophy. And he said that CEDU created an opportunity for adolescents to review their past in developmental stages and complete missed tasks. And I remember reading that line and wanting to shove that back onto the program, to review CEDU's past in developmental stages and complete missed tasks, and complete missed reporting too.
So, in the last 5 years that you've been investigating this, would you say that it's become an obsession, or would you say that it's always been one, and now it's just
Stop.
activated?
Stop. I don't think obsession is the right word when trying to understand institutional child abuse, my own or anyone else's. Obsession is too negative. And anyway, I hope I have a life, and I do have a career beyond the topic. I don't have time to be obsessed.
Well, I'm wondering if you could talk about your process with actually making this into an investigative piece and what it looked like before that.
Yeah, so it was 2015, and I had concealed this for 15 years, this part of my childhood. What I did first really was, tell you. It started with you.
Yeah, it was exactly 5 years ago. It was around this time of year.
Yeah, and from that, I watched the Liam Sheff unfinished documentary, and then I began just sort of scouring the internet and reading the survivor testimony, reading the puff pieces, reading as much on the topic as I could find, and sharing some with you, and then confronting my parents, and then wanting to. I anticipated, because it was the 10-year anniversary, that something would appear, some sort of legacy piece. And I kept waiting, and it didn't. So I began pitching to various editors this idea of a retrospective article. And some of them wrote back pretty swiftly with a no. And then, as a freelancer, you send something to an editor and you can wait months for a rejection. Cut to 2017, and that's really when I thought I had to do this investigative project. I had to do a bigger deep dive, simply because no one was doing it. And that's when I really contacted, say, California DOJ or CDSS or the Department of Education or the Twin Peaks Sheriff Station. I don't know. I think what I was anticipating was to write like a partial draft, and that's what I ended up doing, and sending those drafts to editors, hoping that either it would be collaborative. They'd link me up with another journalist, or they'd say, yeah, let's really do this together. And that never happened. They just rejected the drafts. And a couple said, take out all the investigative stuff and just make it about you and your memories and a dainty personal story. And it wasn't. I don't know. It was a tough time.
You would say, I remember all of that, and a lot of the rejections were frankly pretty absurd. And there's something a little suspicious and, I don't know, mercenary, manipulative about the media just wanting to glom onto stories of individual trauma, because that sells and that's money, and people aren't trusting a survivor with their own story, which is completely absurd.
Well, it's
But
absurd also because, I mean, I think survivors often make the best investigators. So after all that work, in the end, it was the same thing. Take out
right,
all of your investigative work, everything you've done, and just tell your story. And I kept repeating this was a huge problem because I kept saying, look, I don't recall the majority of my confinement. And the parts I do, I don't really want to talk about. And I also don't think they're very interesting to the greater story.
and that that sort of forced telling of your story seems to sort of replicate what what was going on.
Absolutely. Well, yeah, that's a very good point. That's true. But I mean, we're back at 2017, and um, I don't know. I didn't really, I didn't want to do this deep dive. I didn't want to do the fact finding mission. I always felt that, and not because I didn't think I had the journalistic chops. It was always because I thought it was going to destroy my health and destroy my relationship.
What was your hesitation about not wanting to write the personal angle? Why were you compelled to do this deep dive of investigative work, and why have you continued to do it in spite of? I mean, I get it. Like in spite of all these people just like trying to tell you the best way to tell and share your story, people who are in a position of power, but then a lot of the survivors you're hearing from in response to your Medium article aren't needing your like, here's what happened to me, like because I think you say in the article, like it's been told by Liam, it's been told by
Zach Bonney. I mean, there were other, yeah. I mean, that's exactly it. Everything I read was from the survivor's perspective, or from the staffer's perspective. Lon Woodbury or Bill Lane or any of these individuals working in the TTI that have an active media presence. So this is why you have these two starkly different versions, and I didn't want to underscore either, really. I only wanted to insert my own story to push back against a claim that I just knew was totally false, and to push back on the disinformation.
What was your life like before enrollment?
I'm an only child. I should probably point that out. I was a good student. I come from a family of educators who firmly believe in and worked in public schools. My dad is a bit emotionally distant. Mom's a bit of a helicopter mom, but they were always supportive. They were never strict. I didn't have a curfew, for example, and they never punished me. When I dyed my hair green and got into hardcore punk bands, they didn't drag me onto the Maury Povich show. They built a DIY wood drum riser in the basement and encouraged everything. That said, my mom and dad had and have some major flaws that made them easy prey for a program like CEDU. And from living in Running Springs, and from meeting other parents and receiving hundreds and hundreds of messages from survivors, I can say with some certainty that these deficiencies were actually really common among CEDU parents. The first was an inability to fully retain the things I said and to take them seriously. The second was an inability to determine what was basic adolescent behavior, like ordinary impulses, and what was legitimate at-risk behavior. The third was just simply not being investigative people. I've complained to my parents on a number of occasions that they did more research at the grocery store than reading up on so-called therapeutic programs. the fourth flaw, which is like maybe the worst of all, was just simply trusting strangers and trusting psychotropic medications.
I guess my question is for you to like elaborate on what your life was like before the program, not what your parents were like before the program. Not that those are easily extricable.
I mean, I can't really answer that, but it was a fairly normal childhood, and my parents emphatically stated that that it was a normal childhood, and that the single reason that I was shipped off to CEDU was because of an attempted, because they think I attempted suicide, and I don't agree that I tried to kill myself, and I actually remember this night pretty well. It was December 1998. I was alone. I absolutely hated the medications I was taking. I felt poisoned by them, and as an act of youthful rebellion or whatever, I took maybe 4 pills over my prescribed dose of Zoloft, and then I freaked out, and then I called my parents, and my parents rushed home, and they drove me to the ER, and I don't remember anyone at the hospital suggesting that this was a serious suicide attempt. My parents just couldn't entertain the idea that one person's antidepressant is another person's elevator accident. And instead of listening to me, they listened to this therapist, and I had just started seeing the guy, and his response was, this was a suicide attempt, and he needs to go to CEDU, and here's the brochure for the place, here's the VHS, no other recommendation. So that was the start of this narrative, and then it was reinforced by the Swibels, and then it was sort of fed to the CEDU program, and they just jumped on that with glee. I should kind of back up, because when we talk about these things, and we talk about the so-called troubled teen industry, inevitably you hear about desperate parents. So my parents thought they were desperate, and that's why they needed to trust strangers. But my parents, when you really look back on that moment, they weren't desperate after the overdose. And in fact, I returned to high school for maybe 3 or 4 weeks before being sent off to the San Bernardino Mountains. And I was getting my A's and B's and doing the normal childhood thing. And I don't recall desperation or sadness or sympathy. I remember pure anger, just rage.
Rage? Why? Because you disrupted their
Yes.
routine.
Yeah. Yes, that's one part. And my mom thought the suicide attempt, what she considered the suicide attempt, was me copying bad behavior. That was what that was her refrain.
Well, what does that mean?
From where?
From where?
I don't know. What she thought was bad behavior.
The late 90s, like proliferation of
kids doing their low-level overdose and go,
and
yeah,
like
yeah. She just thought, this is my mom as teacher. She thought it was bad behavior, and I was aping it, which is really rich considering I spent 16 months at CEDU aping everyone's disclosures just to survive. That's what we did. This is what I noticed with other CEDU parents too. It wasn't desperation, it was anger, and it was also a kind of like irreconcilable misunderstanding, not desperation, and also a delayed punishment. Swallow a handful of pills in early December, and by January you're at CEDU, or get caught ditching a class or smoking weed, and a few weeks later at 3 a.m. 2 strangers wake you up and throw you into a van.
Yeah. Desperation is like prescribing Zoloft or whatever, but getting you enrolled in this program is calculated.
Yes.
In the course of this investigation, or in the course of like your own attempt to reconcile it with the parts of your life that are just, other work and relationships and whatever, where have you got to find answers to the questions of the horrors of CEDU, and answers to the question of how you incorporate that into your life and yourself.
Well, excluding former CEDU officialdom and various ex-staff and ex-residents, let's see. There was the California Department of Justice, the California Department of Social Services, specifically the Community Care Licensing Division, the California Department of Education, Rim of the World Unified School District, the Twin Peaks Sheriff Station, the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department, the Superior Court of California San Bernardino Criminal Division. This is just going to keep going on and on. The California Digital Newspaper Collection. I also consume like as many stories and regional publications not archived with the CDNC. I also reached out to journalists who covered CEDU in national outlets too. An example, I corresponded with the author of the CEDU Puff piece in Forbes called "When Rich Kids Go Bad." Also for nonprofit info, there was Foundation Center and GuideStar. I think that goes by a different name now. And moving beyond California, I had conversations with 2 licensing program specialists at the Idaho Department of Health and Welfare's Children's Residential Care Agency. I also searched the Idaho Supreme Court data repository. And since Universal Health Services reopened CEDU programs in Idaho, I contacted UHS reps as well as the watchdog organization UHS Behind Closed Doors. I'm sure I've missed some places. It was a long fact-finding mission.
I have a couple of questions, mainly, so with all of these places where you got information, did you find answers, or did it just create more questions? Did it create obstacles that you run into? And
Yes.
And then what obstacles did you run into? What were they?
There has been nothing. There's been nothing but obstacles. Ex-staff, state agents, everyone made this complicated, especially the media. Every pitch I sent, every draft I submitted on spec was under my own name and disclosing child abuse that I had just never shared with anyone. So, getting rejections about how my own story didn't grab an editor, or how it lacked focus, or it just wasn't interesting, or being told that a retrospective on CEDU doesn't warrant anything long form. That was just crushing, and it killed any desire to continue freelance journalism. And the other part of this is, so while CEDU is being rejected, I'm watching CEDU investigations or retrospectives happening like all over the media.
Like for years, I was among the only people who was sort of hearing the fallout and the stress and the revelations and the findings and the distress and from my perspective, it's really been helpful for you to be involved in an expose that is more collaborative. I know that it has been really bizarre, almost how various publications or outlets or whatever want to spin this, and so I guess, has it been affirming, helpful for you to be collaborating with people who might be civilians, but have a vested interest in exposing this?
Yes, but when I'm not always in the dark, I need to have a certain amount of control as well. But that's always been the hope for this, is that it would be a collaborative project.
Because you're not the only survivor, and it's still...
I'm not the only person that's been doing investigative work. I mean...
Right, and it's still happening, so...
Yeah.
I mean, that's a concern, too.
Yeah.
Because, we're paying taxes.
Oh, yeah, in the state.
Yeah. To have this keep happening.
Yeah.
I know you've been receiving a lot of messages from survivors and other folks over the years. What would you say is the most personal, most resonating thing that you've gotten from someone?
the most powerful has to be a letter that the writer and journalist and CEDU survivor Liam Sheff sent to Johnny Profit, who is a fellow survivor, and he had participated in Sheff's unfinished documentary. And Johnny Profit, independent of the documentary, was investigating the program and hoping to expose it to the outside world. And Sheff wanted to thank him for all of his work. And Johnny Profit had sent me the letter a few years ago, and I had hoped to include part of it in the podcast, and it appears it won't be. Tragic, because about 2 months after Liam Sheff sent this message to Johnny Profit, he killed himself. Anyway, I can read you part.
Yeah, I haven't heard it yet.
Okay, I'll pull it up. This is just part of it. You've been a good friend to me and to many by making these pages available for group re-remembering. As painful and ridiculous as the experiences often were, one must recall that we were very unethically and illegally programmed to keep the secret of all that was done to us. They had no legal right, and they have no legal rights to our thoughts, feelings, individual and shared memories. What's important to remember, which is so rarely addressed, is that we were captives on a physical mountaintop, hundreds to thousands of miles away from homes that weren't home anyway because of parents with dubious parenting skills. We were also teens, with no special training or skills, no real toughness, dropped into a cult invented by people we'd never heard of, robbed of books, learning math, English, foreign language, and real study. They stole so much from so many, which is why I told my story. I got mine back, but it was hard and took facing internal dragons or deep fears. That place had nothing to do with my life, what I care about, or who I became or am, except that it taught me that the world gave into cultish fables, and that being imprisoned, robbed of learning, of free discourse, free exchange of ideas, that to me is hell, and CEDU is hell. It could have been very different, just a school with some gentle individual counseling and some non-confrontational group sessions and rigorous academic program that trained us for the real world. Does that sound like what we experienced? Right. Keep well, live, watch the horizon. It's a rapidly changing world.